Hello, class. In this video, I want to show how to draw something like a tree trunk or tree branches. Here we go, we have something up on the screen. Now, in many past videos, I've looked at landscaping features like trees, deciduous trees and their leaves, and pine trees and whatnot, but I think trunks and branches is one thing I haven't spent a lot of time on, so here is an example of what I want to do. And I'm an illustrator because I'll often design or I'll make components or assets in Illustrator to use them in architectural renderings. And the reason I wanted to do this because I knew this was something I haven't done and it sort of interested me. So I also had reason to make a rendering, and I figured, well, let's make a rendering that really uses tree trunks and tree branches to sort of experiment and push myself into this area. So here we go up on screen right now. I'm just showing a drawing that I recently did. I'll probably make a video sort of holistically on how I put this all together too. But for this, it's just about how to make the trunks and the branches themselves. So this is just one component, and I'll approximately recreate this as we see up on the screen. Now, it won't be identical, but it'll be pretty similar. And of course, as you saw in the previous drawing, once you do it once, you can really use the process over and over again to make a variety of different sizes and orientations and things to really help make a unique drawing. So of course, the first step that we're going to do is that whole trunk is just a single line. So I'm going to draw a line, not perfectly straight. That's probably, all in all honesty, a little too crooked. We're going to add some things to this that are purposely not crooked as well, or sorry, purposely add variation to it. You'll see as we go along here. And the first thing we need to do is we need to sort of give it a base color. Now, I've already done this, so I've selected this brown color, and if I just pull up this box, you can check out the numbers there that I'm happy to using. But of course, you're free to choose any colors you want in any of the process, or any particular effects you can play with as you want. But here we go. Here's the colors. R is 210, G is 164, and B is 118. Sort of the simplest way to get that color. There's nothing magical about it, so you just need to be close enough. So we'll say okay. And then I want to give it some thickness so I can sort of see what's going on. In fact, actually, it's going to be quite thick. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a variable width to this tree here in a moment. But before I do that, what I want to do is I'm just going to go ahead and again add some effects to this line itself, so it's not perfectly straight and I can see what's going on. So one of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Effects, Warp, and I'm going to go to Arc. You can see that obviously took that line and not made it straight. It's obviously way too much. I'm going to go to vertical, and I'm going to just pull down that number. You can see it's just taking those lines and sort of making it a little less. And you can play with this again. Any settings you want to go with, you can do that. I'm going to pull up my appearances here. I like to work a lot for my appearances, so we can see here's that warp, and then here's the color and my line weight so far. And I'm going to try a couple more things here. I'm going to go distort, transform, and go to roughen. I always like to work on smooth, and this again is going to be pretty small, maybe around 2%. I'll do a preview so we can see what's happening. And also this, I want to be pretty small. You can sort of see what's happening there. Might do something like 0.5 as well. It just is no longer a perfectly even line anymore. So warp sort of took it off the straight edge, and then roughen sort of gives some minor variations to the line width. That will help, so when I go to change the line width to be variable, the small things are taken care of in this roughen, and the big ones I'll do through the other techniques. So we'll say okay again, play with any effects that you might want to do. And then I think in my original one, it might not be needed. I did put it in here, so I'll do it. I think I did round corners. And the reason why for that is like something like this could be rounded out a little bit, although it obviously is just by using warp. But we can see even when I do this, no effect really happens. So I probably don't need it. So let me turn that one off. Now, Once I have that, what I will do is now I will use my variable width tool to further change the width of this tree. So I can come up to my variable width tool over here. And, I started by widening out the trunk a bit to give it a big base. Now, I found that there's sort of a big steep curve of a tree, like this. So you can sort of see that sort of gets the base. Of course, the top probably wants to be the most skinny. Oops, I missed there. I can try that again. I said it. There we go. So we sort of get something like that, and we can start to see that this is taking on the shape of a tree already just by widening this, sort of appropriately putting that at a width, and then here too. And of course, if you want to, this might perfectly be good. If you want to add more, you can pick any point and sort of play with that as well, and it'll again change the width of that tree. You can also, if you want to change direction of the tree, you can move any of these points wherever you decide you want to move them, or even as needed, add points and then put those points where you want. So in this case, sort of making this tree look like it's bent over to the right on the screen. Now, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll block out the base of my tree, so I'm not too concerned that the base looks crooked, but I can always, move this point around if I wanted to get a little more even look on that tree. Of course, I can pull it up as well if I want to make the tree taller. So you got all those variables there to sort of get this tree into shape. I actually think I need to take this guy and make him a little skinnier. Give it a little more dramatic base there. And then I'm going to take whatever I have here as a result, and I need to make him skinnier as well. That's probably too skinny. Anyway, you can keep playing it. I have another point here. There we go. As soon as you start to get too many points, it can be a bit problematic. But there we go. There's a tree width for you there. Now, I think this one happens to be a little skinnier than the one I showed an example, but that should be okay. I can also just holistically sort of make it larger too. So that's 134. So if I went to something, let's say 160, and I'll sort of equal out the whole branch. That's probably closer to what I had as an example. So we'll just sort of go with that. Now, it is key to sort of set. It's easier to adjust your tree shape now and your line width now, because when I start adding, I'll add multiple strokes to get this done, and then if you want to change the stroke width, then you have to change it for each one, which is not too bad. There's only a couple strokes, but it's easier to do it once than not. So we'll go with that with my tree trunk, and that's my base. And we'll move on to the various strokes that produce all the effects to sort of give it texture. Now, I'm going to start with the shade and shadow. So obviously this has to look round, which means one side's going to be sort of darker in color and one side's sort of going to be a bit lighter in color. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a gradient to do that. Of course, I'm going to make a new stroke. And now this is just a duplicate stroke, so it's the same color right on top. But what I'll do is I'll go to switch it to gradient. I'm going to put my stroke as a gradient like this. Now I have to make some adjustments to this gradient. I'm going to do shadow first. So I'm going to have to do, I'm going to actually do both sides black. So I'll click down here. Let me pull this out, so it doesn't disappear on us as we sort of go through the process. Let's make it easier. There we go. Okay. So I'll double click on that. I'll just pick a black, both sides black. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to turn one side completely transparent, so it just fades to black in this way. Now the key to this gradient is I want to apply the gradient across the stroke, which is this button right here. And we can see when I do that, what it does is it's full black on the right hand side, and because I set it transparent, it's sort of lightening up over here. And actually what we'll do is we'll make that sprite brighter too, because this brown is my base brown. But since I want to have a light area, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this whole thing and I'm actually going to pull it in a good chunk of the way, almost halfway, maybe a little more, just to get the shadow going across in that way. And actually, what I think I'm going to do, because I think I'm going to actually pull this out as well. Didn't mean to pull that. I just want to shift this over just to give a little bit stronger of a shadow edge and get the fade just going a little more. Again, you can adjust this as you need to. Now, obviously, this is pretty dark right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to this stroke and pull it down and just change the opacity of this gradient alone to, something around probably 50% would work pretty well. 49 is close enough, so you can see we just sort of shade that in on that side. Now I'm going to do almost the identical thing for the lighting side of it. And I'm going to duplicate the stroke. Now I just sort of have it on it in this case here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to change it to white, although really a lighter brown might work better. But I'll start with white and see how it goes, and then I can sort of warm it up. Because part of the issue is white is also sort of going to cool down the effect of the tree. But we'll get it here. It's all on the right hand side there, so I'll just reverse the gradient, and you can see that now I've sort of lightened it up on that side. And if I were to click off, you can sort of see it's sort of starting to make this trunk look somewhat cylindrical like it's supposed to. So again, I might just come in here and see if there's any. I might even try this default brown color. I'll probably have to make it lighter than that, but let me start here and go. Let's go to here and go to HSB, just because, again, it doesn't have to be perfect. You're free to set these colors however you want them to be, and I'm just sort of pulling them across here. So I'll do that. And the other thing I can do with this is I can, I can choose to make it not as transparent because it's lighter color, so that'll sort of strengthen. Oops, I forgot to select it there. Or I can even change, here we go. So I can make it brighter. You can see it gets lighter, or I can even try things like changing the blending mode. So something like an overlay or a bright light will sort of absorb the colors and sort of make them brighter. So I sort of like that set to overlay, set to 60 for now. And I can always go back and adjust things as needed, just to sort of warm up that light color so it's sort of more feels like the sun. So there we go. Now it's a cylinder. Obviously, it lacks a lot of the detail of the tree. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do some bark. I'm going to put some bark texture on this. And I found the easiest way to do this is through an image. And so we want to prepare an image for that. So I'm going to go to Photoshop here. And just give me a second to pull up Photoshop. And I have Photoshop here. Now this is an image. I'm going to get to this in a bit in the video. This is for the lichen. That's the actual one I use, but I'll show you how to create that quickly too. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to open, and what I actually used was, I just found this on Google. I just found something that looked like it had, a nice texture to it. And what I did is I just made some adjustments to it. So I turned it to black and white. Whoops, I don't know why I just canceled it. Let me try that again. Adjustments, black and white. Okay, there we go. Turned it black and white, and I think I did a few things like brightness, contrast, just to sort of up the contrast a bit. Because what I'm ultimately going to use, I'm going to use the multiply blending tool, so the whites will fade away and become nothing in the image, and then the darks will just sort of become the shadow line that'll produce this texture for me. So you just play with these settings as you want and save that as an image. So we'll save this as a JPEG. It's perfectly fine. In fact, here's my textures that I actually use for the real drawing, but if I were to save it again, we can do that. So I'll just call it Bark 2 just to save it again. You can see here's the one that I used previously. I had previously made. So we'll come here, and now we're just going to make it a swatch. So the first step to do that is I'm back in Illustrator, and I'm going to go File, Place, and I'll have to find the location I saved this under. Okay, I think nope, that's not where I saved it. See, a lot of these things I ran tests and it's for the full image is probably under texture. Here we go. Here we go. So, oops, I want to check something. I'm going to press escape here now that I did it. Let me place this again. We want to make sure to make a swatch. Yeah, I'm glad I did it just a little too fast. You want to make sure link is unchecked. This process won't work if that's checked. So make sure that's unchecked, then hit place. You can just put it in. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to scale it down, so it's about as wide as the widest part, or really, it doesn't matter. It's going to be so faded back. You sort of want to give it the scale of whatever texture that you want it to against the tree. And again, this is just diagrammatic. It doesn't have to be perfect. So maybe something like that. And if that looks good, you can come up to your swatches. And I'm gonna, I think for this demonstration, I'll just pull out my swatches as well to make it easier. So you have this image. I'm going to drag and drop right in here. I'm going to delete that, and I'm going to select my tree branch. Now, just to make things easier, I'm going to select my bottom stroke here because I need to duplicate or just make a new stroke that has all the same properties. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this swatch that I just made, and there we go. Now we have our swatch there. So give me a second here. I just need to, oops, not go to Photoshop. Oh shoot, did I just close that? Oh well, I'll have to reopen it when I need to reopen it. All right, so now that I have this on, obviously we want to see the color and the shading and all that good stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this to multiply as I said I would. So let me push this down. Let me go to opacity and set to multiply. And multiply essentially takes out the white and we only see the black. Of course, that's pretty strong as well. So I'm going to, again, take this probably down to about 50, wherever. It doesn't matter. You can play it off yourself. And there we go. So now we've got this texture, sort of has this bark-like quality, and it's got shading. So we're doing pretty good at this point. In fact, it's very possible that maybe this is, a good spot and you don't need any more for the work you're working on. This gets you pretty far, but we'll look at a couple more details as needed. One of the things I might do is I actually might take this stroke and I'm going to put it above the shading, because it's shaded itself. So I want to make sure that we see that texture a little better, but I also want the bright spots to sort of brighten out the shadow area of the texture, so I'm going to leave it below. So purposely put that bark between the highlight stroke and the shading stroke. So just make that simple move there. And then the last thing, let's see, we can do is we can add the lichen to it. And not just the lichen is the green stuff that sort of, you might call it, it's not moss, but maybe you think of it as moss. It sort of speculates up a trunk and on a bark, on the bark. And I'm not a biologist, so I don't even know why I'm talking about it. But let me show you how to do that from Photoshop. All right, I just actually paused the video. I know I was talking a bit in a slow cadence there. It's actually snowing here today, and my cat was outside, and I thought I heard him meowing, and he was, so I had to let the little guy in to warm up. So anyway, what I was saying was talking about lighting. Not lighting, lichen, and lichens, that stuff that grows up the trees. It's a nice little detail because many trees have it, so I like to add it. And then after that, I'm going to show you how to do like speckled lighting. Because again, I've shown in other videos how to do leaves, but really if the light's coming through leaves, then the lighting isn't as consistent. It's not a perfect cylinder as I sort of have done now. I have to sort of get the sort of speckled effect. But I think both that speckled lighting and the lichen itself are added, so you may use them, you may not, depending on your needs. But I'll show them both. Both were done using some Photoshop. So again, this is actually what I used in the one that I had previously shown at the beginning of the video, and it take me some time to get there, so I might do it a little quicker. It might not look quite as good because I'm just moving more quickly, and quite honestly, it took me several times. I did it, I edited it, I applied it, I came back, I edited it, I reapplied it, and so on and so forth. And that's what it takes sometimes. So I'll show you the basic steps on how I did it, and you can work in the same process. So the first is to create a canvas that's approximately the proportions of your trunk. I happen to know mine, although again, it took some experimentation, but what I'll do is I'll do File New here, File New. I like to work in inches because I'm an architect, so I happen to have like 6 and 30 by 72 because obviously those inches are bigger than the real trunk size, so the resolution can be low. It doesn't matter. It's all about proportions. It should. All right, so here it is. Now the first thing I need to do is I need to make a new layer. So make a new layer over here. There we go. And ultimately, I'll turn off the background because I want this to be transparent. But I want to see the white. Just make it easier to see for now. And then I have two colors. I used two colors to make this. Again, took me some time to figure out, but here's what I use. Feel free to use what you want. So a light green of 209, 214, 193. And then I'll follow that up with a dark green of 135, 150, and 115. So I'm going to start with the light green, and I just used a series of brushes. These are default legacy brushes that I loaded in, and you can experiment with different ones. Here's this one set this way, and I want to start thicker and work thinner, so I don't know, around 50, 60 I'm going to start with, and I'm going to start by coloring in the base a bit more because lichen tends to be thicker at the base and sort of is less thick as you go up, so we'll sort of just paint on a rough gradient of this light green color as we sort of walk our way up. The trunk, what will be the trunk. There'll be lots of filters applied to this to help it a lot. Now I'm focusing less on the top because what I'll do is I'll shrink the brush down. That was around 50. Here's around 30. So I'll add more of these lighter strokes at the top and sort of pull those light strokes in as well. And I might even go lighter than that, so maybe I'll go around, I don't know, 15, 16, might be a bit light, sort of even do little dots around for little zones of lichen that sort of appeared in other places. Get those sort of sprinkled around like this. Again, it did take me several times to get this. I went back and forth and back and forth, so you might need to do the same thing. And then I'll just switch to my darker color and do the same thing. Start a little bit bigger, maybe not quite as big because I want to see the light green in many cases below it. Although I think I'm going to put a little more darker color down at the bottom and to the right, given what my shading is like. But really, I want to sort of fill in a lot of things as well because it's just it's less about shading and more about the variation that happens in natural light lichen. And I'm not a biologist, but you know, just get something that sort of works. These will also be blended together at a certain period of time in the process as well. So I don't know, we'll try something like that. I got some darks, I got some light colors, and now we'll do some uh, we'll do textures to it. So I'm on the layer one, we'll go filter. I'm going to go filter gallery for this, and I'm going to start. Ooh, that's sort of nice by itself, actually. Oh, I see why. Because of course it already has what I previously did. So let me just show the steps of how I got to that. So I started with texture, or texturize, I should say, which is under texture. And I set, here's the numbers I use, but you can try what you want. 109 for scaling and relief of floor. Then, as I'll often do, is I added stained glass to this. So to get stained glass to work, you need to first start with a texture, which is why I texturize it. But stained glass allows me to adjust the cell size. That gets the variation in different colors because usually one cell is of a single color. So it starts to get the size of the texture that I want to. It's the one tool in Photoshop and Illustrator that you can sort of control the size of the texture. Of course, it's a little rigid and has border thickness is what you want to be 0. So that's why I'll add other filters to start to get rid of that. So, so for example, grain just adds a little bit of detail more to it. So I'd use 22 and 11, not much. And also I changed the grain type to contrasty, right? So it was a little bit thicker and bigger. And then I did ocean ripple to start to blend it all together, right? Just sort of distorts it a bit. So we can see 22 and 11 in that case. And then we can say, okay. So that starts to get you there. We can start to see it's much more of a texture of colors. Now, what I also did is I blurred it together a little bit. So we can do something like Gaussian blur, and you can set this to how you want to sort of pull it in as a texture. Again, we're going to use a lot of blending tools in Illustrator as well. So we'll just say okay on that guy, and I'll turn off the background so it becomes transparent. And we'll save this as a PNG. So File, save as, PNG, and I called it moss here because I wasn't very smart before, but uh, that's what I did. So you can see it took me, I used the 6th one there. It's a little insight. I'll call this one 7, just to show, okay, sure, fine. And then back to Illustrator to apply this layer. Oops, I went back to Photoshop for some reason. All right, so back to Illustrator. And what I'll do is I'll just take my base layer again because I want the same stroke width and everything else. So I'll duplicate that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this up to the area that I want to put it at, which I think is above the bark for sure. I think I'll put it there below the highlight, and we can see we just sort of blocked out everything for now. But I'm going to do the same thing as I did for the bark. I have to bring in this texture. So I'll go File, Place, and I'm going to cheat and just go to my moss that I actually used, which was 6 in this case, and place this in here, making sure it's not linked. And we can see, here we go. Here it is. And I'm actually just going to scale it down to match the trunk of my tree a little bit. So it was actually bigger than I needed. And it's like, and it has no specific size, so I'm just going to make sure it covers the top a little bit, make sure it covers the widest part of the width a little bit, and then the same at the bottom down here. Let's pull this up to about here. So we can see where the lichen is. In this case, it'll just sort of apply to the bottom. Now in this particular tree, I'd like some lichen up at the top of the tree, so I'm just going to shift it over like this. That's about the texture I want. I could make it a little skinnier if I wanted to. Doesn't matter. It's not perfect, but we'll go with this. I'll just drag this image right into my swatches and delete it. And it's just temporarily there, and I'll select my tree trunk, and I sort of set up the stroke already, and I'll just select the lichen, and there we go. It's applied. Now we can see actually in this case, because of the way I have all the filters, the tree is being rendered below the line a little bit, so it's starting at the line. If I need to move it, I'll just hold tilde on my keyboard and use my black arrow, and we can see it just moves the texture itself. And I can move it over to the right as well. We can see I start to get a little lichen up there at the top of the right as and there we go. So there's the lichen. Now I think what I also did is I probably played with transparency and things a bit. So let me just lower the opacity on this to wherever you want it. 75-ish range, maybe a little higher, 80-ish range seems to be pretty good. And there we go. We got some lichen on the tree, which adds a bit of texture to that. That's a bit much, maybe. Some trees have a lot, some trees don't. So that's all in your Photoshop file and how much you want to add or not. But it's sort of a fun little interesting trick that I used, and I think it adds enough detail to it. Now the last thing I want to do again is just sort of speckle lighting. So again, I did that in Photoshop. And I did it pretty simply. I don't even have the original up because I think I can sort of recreate that enough. And I'm just going to go to File, New. I don't know, I might even try, let me just go like with 8.5 by 11 as a background. 300 DPI is probably not needed. Let me just go to 100. So I'll just go to Create this here. And what I did is I just made my foreground color white, or I might have done it the other way, not sure it matters, and the background color black. And all I did was I went to Filter, Render, Clouds. All right. And what I actually did, let me think about this for a sec. I think I faded it out. So again, the light's coming from the left, or in my case, so the speckles would be on the left, but not on the right. So I had to fade it out. So I think what I did is I added a, let me unlock the layer. I added a mask to this layer, and over most of it, let's say, or maybe half of it, on the mask layer, I did a gradient from black to white. My gradient's tucked away, I think, here. So let me pull up gradient. There's my gradient tool. It actually can be black to transparent or black to white for the mask. It doesn't matter. And I masked it out so we can see the stipple is on the right because the right's fully in shade anyway, right? So I did something like this, and I just had this shape. Um, the other thing I think I did, so I didn't get hard lines vertically, because I want to stack this up and I'll make this scaled correctly. What I did is I actually um, duplicated this layer up and then flipped it or mirrored it on itself so it would sort of be matching. So let me do that. Let me go to image, canvas size, start with canvas size. I'm going to push this bottom arrow and make it twice as high, which would be 22. All right, and then I'm going to duplicate this layer by right clicking on it, duplicating the layer. So I have it here, and I'm going to move this up. We can see, right, like if I didn't do anything, I'd get that line right there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to edit, transform, flip vertically. And actually what I can do is even better than that. It's still sort of a bit of a line there. Actually, if I line it up, there we go. If I line it up, I for some reason moved it, but there we go. We can see now, you can definitely tell it's mirrored, but it sort of bleeds into itself. I can actually work on that a little bit as well by pulling this here and doing a mask of a gradient here and sort of blending them together a little bit more if I wanted to. But I don't think I did. I think I kept it simple because it's a very subtle feature. So something like this starts to create some stippling shadow on the left, no shadow on the right. So I'm just going to save this as a PNG file again so I can get the transparency on that. So we'll call it shadow 4. You can see the one I used here, but I'll use this new one, so I'll call it shadow 5. Again, the good lesson here is I show you how to do this pretty much in one step because I already did it, but many of these steps took many tries and trial and error type process, and even that's would still be okay for you to do because you got to get this the way you want to. So we'll come back to here. We'll do the same exact thing to make a swatch. We'll go File, Place. We'll pull in that shade here. So when I click, make sure it's not linked. We'll just click it in. We'll scale it down to the approximately the right size. Again, the shading doesn't really matter, so I can squish it. I don't have to scale proportionally or anything like that. It's way too tall and stretched out. In fact, if I wanted to, because I could keep it like this if I think the stippling worked, but we have to remember that this all matches together pretty well. So I can, if I want to make the stippling smaller, I can just simply pull it down and scale as I need to. And really, I guess most of this is going to be based off of, I'm going to go from the wide part here to the skinny part there, I think, as sort of a base location of where the stipple will go. Again, we can always try it. I can always change it once it's made as a swatch. Excuse me. So anyway, I have it selected. I'll pull it into my swatches, and then I'll delete it here. And I will come select my object. I'll go back to my base swatch, my base stroke again, make that new. I'll probably pull this all the way to the top, blocks out everything, but in this case I will set it to this stippling effect I have. Now it's not located again in the right spot, so I simply go to my black arrow, and I do have to hold tilde on my keyboard here so I can shift that shadow over so that, again, the stippling isn't on the right hand side. Now in this case my tree is bending a lot to the right, so I've got a bit of an area here. Now I might be able to solve that by scaling it. So I have to use the scale tool, not the black arrow, to do this, and I still have to hold tilde on my keyboard. I have to select my object first. There we go. So I'm going to go to the scale tool, hold tilde down, and sort of just make it wider. That was too wide, so let me undo that. Alternatively, I could straighten out my trunk as well, right? That would also work. Let me just try this one more time. Make it a little wider, then just move it, go back to the move and tilde and move that over. And I think that's pretty good. It feels a little stretched out, and a little bit too speckly on the right hand side, but I think it'll work. Again, you give it a go, you give it a try. And of course, what I need to do now, anything that's black and white already starts to just have to be multiplied so we see what's below it, and then of course you just change the transparency down to something pretty low. In this case I have it set to 34, whatever feels about right to give you the speckled trunk-like effect. And so with that, that's pretty much all the steps that I did to make the trunk. Again, I did trial and error on a lot of those things, and you may have to too. You might not need all those steps to. I do the same thing to make branches. It's just obviously the shading's down on the shade is on the lower side. The bright spot might be on the upper side. You can change the width of these. You can change, if I come here and do this, it changes the tree, right? So it's really easy to get lots of different trees. One of the things, if you're working in Photoshop or using images, like, oh, I've got one good tree, and you use it 100 times. Here, you just make some slight changes. You change the stroke width, you do all these things, and you have a new and different trunk. And that is, again, pretty much how I did this drawing here. If I pull this up, all these trunks in here. Now, obviously, I used different darker colors, which I manipulated in Photoshop in the end to add uh, darker in the foreground and lighter in the background and all those, but it's all that same thing. I made it a graphic style. I drew a new line. I applied it. I changed the stroke widths. I did the branches are hard to see. There's some branches up in here as well. But again, all I did is I used the same thing. I just used something from very thin at the tip to, something slightly thicker where the branch goes out, and you can go and build any tree you want and have a pretty cool image. So again, maybe sometime in the future I'll actually show all the steps to creating this, the tree being one of them. But otherwise, have fun making new drawings. I can't wait to see what you made.